Welcome back to America's Voice Now. We had an article that I posted up on AVN and on our website, and Facebook channels, and so forth. And it concerned the idea that we have a problem with the fact that there's been some concerns about issues of who is the greatest threat to the United States. Is it Iran with a nuclear weapon? The other day, Japan, it was revealed, is working to develop their own version of the nuclear weapon. Is it a nation, a rogue nation like, Iran, who is going to try to defeat us militarily? Or there was an article out that I posted. It's called Iran Ships Are a Dry Run for a Later Nuclear/EMP Attack. And it was in the Washington Examiner, and it was an interesting article because it had a fairly interesting theory about it that wasn't without some substance. And the reason for that is because EMP, or electromagnetic pulse, which basically fries all the electronics in its wake, that's an easy and cheap and fast way to accomplish that. You would actually take the fight home immediately. In other words, it would bust us down from the inside, right? Because if we had a grid destruction or an EMP that was able to fry a significant percentage of the American electronic, I mean, we live in an electronic world, folks. I don't think most people have really sat down and put any real thought into contemplating what would happen if we had no electricity, even for a relatively short period of time, a couple months. I mean, especially if it was national. If it was an isolated pocket or something, that's one thing. But when I talked about that attack where they shot up an electric unit or location in San Jose, and no one knows what the deal is with that. It's a big, it's another big secret. They kept it from us for almost a year that it actually occurred. And the point is that the electrical system in the United States is a weak point for us. And we're not the only ones who know it, right? And we've talked repeatedly about, trying to shore up the grid in the United States. And for whatever reason, Congress just seems to be willing to sit on their hands. They're willing to blow $1 trillion on a farm bill, but they're not willing to throw, a few billion, or I don't even care if it was 50 billion at fixing our grid. What's wrong with them? Well, one of the responses that came out was that one of the people who listens to the program on a routine basis commented back. He said, I think Iranian and Syrian threats are more propaganda than anything else. And I agree with him on that point. I think the goal of our government is to occupy Iran, Syria, and the Ukraine, and soon Venezuela. They are all very important pieces in the global chess game. I also think that we are lied to on every front, and that they are feeding on the fear and the concern of people who can see something is wrong but just don't know what. This is quite articulate from Russ here. And it's spot on. He's actually quite accurate here. If we weren't running an empire, the world would seem so small. Whatever happens in this country, I promise it won't be Iran, Syria, North Korea, China, or Russia. It will be our own government frothing the mouths of the underinformed, indoctrinated fools who will demand violence while giving away their own rights. It's worked before, almost 13 years ago. After the Iran and Syria comes Russia and China. Then what? What will the war machine turn on after that? I don't believe for a second any of this has anything to do with security or our nation or our rights. I think it is the establishment of a global government, and the U.S. is the enforcement division and nothing more. He's actually quite accurate in some of those comments. The point is that the real threat that we have to our nation now is not some terrorist threat from outside. I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that when we look at what has occurred from a terrorist standpoint, it really doesn't have the hallmarks of. I don't believe for a moment that 9/11 was completely, nobody knew it was happening and it just slipped on by. I mean, I'm not saying that we were responsible for it, but I'm saying that somebody knew it was happening. And I don't know enough about it to be able to, show any evidence to that, but I can say that there's so many questions out there and so much misinformation, misdirection, and propaganda that's shoved at us from our government that it leads us to question these things. And I don't have the answers. I'm just, I'm a flea on the elephant's behind, folks. But the truth is, I believe that our own government is a greater threat to us than those of foreign governments. They are feeding us a lot of propaganda about Syria and Iran and Afghanistan and North Korea, China, Russia. Your job, my job, is to make sure that we are taking the time to look beyond the initial face that they show us. Look beyond the initial story that they provide for you, because that is essentially propaganda, folks. I mean, let's be candid about what we're looking at here. Our media has been complicit, complacent, and willing to betray the trust of the American people by allowing this to go on and allowing this to continue. They refuse to expose that which they should and could. Perfect example is the TPP earlier. I talked about it earlier. Where are the investigative journalists on the TPP and the TTIP? There aren't any. There is no investigative journalism left in the United States because they're all owned by the same corporate masters that are driving this globalist nonsense. And in large part, we are the mercenaries of the globalists. The United States. We are the mercenaries of the globalists. I mean, we're put into these situations, and our young men and women are told that, this is for fighting for freedom and liberty. Listen, we're sitting over there pitching, democracy, which we aren't even practicing ourselves, for crying out loud, to Afghanistan, who doesn't even want it. And, it's all so empty and hollow. When we look at what happened over in Iraq, here we spent how many lives of our young men and women, how much national treasure, only to walk away from it at the end and allow it to collapse right back into what it was. It's even worse now than what it was when Saddam Hussein was in power. I'm not saying Saddam was a good guy. I'm just saying that the people who live in Iraq are in worse shape today than they probably were under him. How can we sit there and say that we're shipping democracy and a Republican form of government overseas when we don't practice it ourselves? I find that this whole issue of manipulation by our politicians and our media, to me, is the greatest threat that we have. Because, and I broke this story months ago, in the Federal Register, they have obviated the limitation on utilizing propaganda against the United States of America. There was a legal prohibition against it. They've lifted it. Most people don't even know that. And the simple fact is that when you're talking about propaganda and its ability to influence the public, that is our own government working against us. They're lying and misrepresenting to us what the facts are, not only domestically, but globally. If they are, and I don't think anyone at this point can deny they are, what would be their motive? What's the end result of all of that? It's not just so that these guys can stay in short-term power. There's a bigger picture, a bigger plan. The real threat to our nation is the fact that our media and our government are in bed together. That the two are helping support each other in their efforts and drive and motivation to turn this nation into something that none of us want or will recognize. And the media has so much influence. They can make what Obama says sound like it's good stuff. I mean, look at how many people have been fooled by it. I saw a poll the other day that said that 71%, I think it was 71% of people who voted for Obama would not vote for him again. But that's not enough. The problem that we have is not really a question of would these people vote for him again. They wouldn't vote Romney in either. That same poll said that, those people wouldn't have voted Romney in. And I think, it's easy to, as an armchair quarterback, to look back in history and say, well, I shouldn't have voted for Obama. But when the next person comes up, when it's Hillary against God only knows who the Republicans are going to put up there, are we not going to see the same rout at the polls that we saw in 08 and 12? I mean, the media is already building Hillary Clinton up like she's the de facto president already. I mean, look at the stuff that they pump out about her. It's embarrassing. I see it and I read it or I hear it, and I'm telling you, my skin crawls. Because it's like they are already putting her in the de facto position of president. It's a fait accompli. The biggest problem that we have as a threat to our nation is our own media and the lies that our own representatives are telling us. Because all the other threats we hear about, we don't even know if they're real. But this one, we see and smell and taste it's real because it's right here in our face. Should we be nervous about a terrorist attack in the United States? Yes. But the truth of the matter is you have a greater chance of being killed by your own government than you do from some dirty bomb or some explosion in some city somewhere or the detonation of a nuclear device or even an EMP. The real problem, as I see it, is that even if this government at any point begins to feel like it's looking at the loss of its power, what it'll end up doing is utilizing some sort of a false flag to accomplish the goal that it can't get on its own. Don't tell me that we don't have those people. I mean, you can't be real when you tell me that, remember the Maine? How about the Lusitania? How about Pearl Harbor? How about the Gulf of Tonkin? I mean, everybody is capable of going out and looking that information up and seeing that all of that was a false flag to get us involved in a war. Bush with the WMD for Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Even the liberals will agree to that one. In fact, that's their main, rally cry. Same thing in Afghanistan. We're going to go in and get those terrorists who blew up the World Trade Center. Come on, man. I mean, really. Why did it take us 13 years, and why are we still there? We're spending our blood and our treasure to defend against a phantom threat that really belongs in the seat of power in D.C. The 10 square miles of treason that is working against everything that our Constitution and our foundational beliefs and principles and precepts and concepts ever stood for. I know that's not popular to say, but it doesn't change the fact that it's true. Look at what's going on around you. I mean, just the debt aspect alone is a great threat to the American sovereignty and our ability to function as a nation. And these guys, I mean, they just passed a $1 trillion farm bill. Please. They gave the president a blank check when we're already 17 plus trillion in debt, and they gave him a blank check for the next 13 months. They didn't lift the ceiling and then move it up a notch or two. They just literally took the ceiling away and said, Obama, you can borrow as much as you want between now and March of 2015. We don't know what that number will look like. But if past history is any indication of future performance, we can be guaranteed we're going to see at least another trillion, maybe $1.5 trillion, at minimum. Minimum, folks. You're talking about an additional $1 trillion to $1.3 trillion at minimum. God only knows what he could come up with as an excuse between now and March of 2015 to say, well, we got to tack on another $1 trillion on top of that to cover the shortage of Obamacare. I mean, really. In fact, we haven't even seen the beginning of that the beginning of that debacle of a bailout of the insurance companies, which we know is in the bill. We don't know what the price tag is. It's another one of these, phantom. I mean, look, there's nothing that is honest or true that's coming out of your government right now. Nothing at all. Everything you see, everything you hear from them is a lie or a misdirection or a manipulation, and it's all propaganda. The media is complicit. The great threat that we have in the United States of America is that we have lost control of those who govern us. They no longer govern by our consent. That's it in a nutshell, folks. We've lost control. I don't know how we get it back. Surely we can't do so at the voting booth. I mean, it's not who votes, it's who counts the votes. If you think 2014 is going to be devoid of fraud, think again. The national tone right now is so, negative against the Democrats with Obamacare and all the rest of that. You watch how many people pull it out. How many of those Democrats will actually get reelected? And you're going to know fraud is happening in a massive way. There are actions that our states, can take. We can institute, things like voting limitations and like Missouri is doing, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, where, they push back against federal overreach. But ultimately, we can't control what they do with the national debt, which I don't care how insulated you can make your state. If the national currency collapses, that's going to affect your state no matter what they do. I got to tell you, in my way of thinking, and certainly I'm not mainstream about this, the problem that we have is that 10 square miles in Washington, D.C. has become an unannounced tyrannical dictator. The Congress is participating in it and unwilling to stop it. They're talking about filing a lawsuit. The courts are in on it. I read an article yesterday that they're talking about filing a lawsuit against Obama for this unconstitutional, things about and executive actions related to Obamacare and other things. We don't have years for that stuff to wend its way through the courts. And already the courts have found against him on stuff like the National Labor Relations Board appointments and things like that. It still doesn't matter. You've got Eric Holder, who's been found guilty of civil and criminal action. I mean, here's a guy who is supposed to be the chief law enforcement officer of the country, and he stands up there and he lies and he lies to the face of Congress, and he gets caught at it, and nobody can do a thing about it. You can't even get the guy out. Impeachment's not an option. The Senate's owned by Harry Reid. 2014 is going to be an election that I think is one way or the other going to send this country in the final tailspin or offer some short respite. But I got to tell you, I don't have a lot of faith that we're not going to see this thing go into a tail. If, and even if Republicans can hold the day and, let's say, take the Senate back, what kind of a job have they been doing for us when they owned the House? What kind of a job have they been doing for us when they owned the House and the Senate, too? They still betrayed us. They just did it their way instead of the other way. I mean, really. Both these parties are not interested in you. You're just fodder. You're firewood to keep the flame moving. They don't really care about you. It's shameful that our country has gotten to this point and that we don't have anybody who can stand up as a leader and say, I'm for the right things. That can say, and is in a position to have pure motive to actually do what's right for the country. There's no George Washingtons. There's no Thomas Jeffersons. There's no Madisons available to us. There's no Patrick Henrys out there. Those few that are silenced. You know, I kind of jokingly refer to this radio program as my Paul Revere moment, because I do this as just because I'm tired of waiting for somebody else to stand up and say something. But I'm silenced. Go look at the number of YouTube views this thing gets. A couple of hundred. A couple thousand people on the internet. A couple thousand people on the radio. You got to be kidding me. There's 700 videos up there. How is it that those... but, you know, I can do a dog trick video and I can get 6 million views. Come on. I mean, I get it. People don't want to hear bad news. And I grant you that usually I'm discussing and exposing bad news. But that doesn't account for the lack of views that these programs get. Just saying. I get it. I'm abrasive. Some people don't like that. But, you know, you can't tell me that there's only 250 people that on all of the millions and millions and millions and millions of people on YouTube, other than the fact that YouTube is doing everything they can to suppress it. That's my point. The threats that we have are from here. They are us. They are our failure to stand up and defend and protect our own nation. They are your failure and mine to take action against what has clearly become a deplorable level of oppression from our own government, state and federal. Federal is obviously far more, far greater, but it's no excuse on the state levels. Look at Cuomo. I mean, you got to be kidding me. What a little fascist. Cuomo. What a fascist. I cannot believe that New York State actually allows that guy to run. And de Blasio. I mean, how does he win in a... He's going to run the greatest city in the world into the ground. All right, we're down to the last 2 minutes. I think the real, in summation, folks, the real greatest threat is, one, ourselves, because we're refusing to stand up and put forth the sacrifice that's necessary and do the hard work that's going to be required of us to take this nation back. And our primary enemy is not some far-off land, not some guy in a turban living in a cave somewhere. It's right in Washington, D.C., in a $2,500 suit that he bought with your money. You can find us every day at americasvoicenow.org. Make sure that you visit our sponsors. If you have an opportunity to, you can find our friends over at Battery Station at batterystation.com/America. I'm sorry, batterystation.com. You can also call them at 417-257-7799. You can also visit our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop. Those guys